So I do press this button.
Hello. You pressed that button. We pressed the button. We launched the thing. Hey, everybody. Welcome to week 3 of the Four Conversations Book Club. Chapter 3, The Value Conversation. We're glad you're here. Thanks for joining us. I'm Adrian McIntyre. I'm the principal of Speed of Story, a communications firm in Phoenix, Arizona. And I'm a win without pitching coach. And I have the great pleasure of hosting and emceeing these series of 4 conversations with Blair ends. Uh, Thank you for joining us. What we'd love to hear from is so just get the chat warmed up. Let us know how many people are at your firm. What's your head count? This could be one if you're a soloist, to
Or 1 million.
1 million if you're a Dr. Evil. Zero is not a valid option here. This is not a self-esteem measure. This is a head count measure. So regardless of how you feel today, how many people are in your firm? We got a lot of people here. Great. Welcome, everybody.
Hey, Andrew, who says hi, everyone from Toronto. Andrew, I'm in Toronto Friday and free for lunch unless I bail and head back to the airport. Um, I'll message you in the academy. But you're probably in like Mississauga or something.
Somewhere. Okay. Colleen Kelly says, Adrian. I can't tell you the number of times people do the Sylvester Stallone at me. I have never seen that movie. At this point, it's kind of a point of pride. I sort of
Oh my
refuse.
God, I was thinking about it. Yes, my sister's name is Adrian, spelled
Yeah.
differently.
Oh, cool. It's a great name.
So,
I'm told it's a great movie.
yeah.
All right, Blair. This is the Four Conversations Book Club. Everybody. So the theory here is this is a book club, meaning you have the book, you've read the book, you've come prepared to discuss the book, not learn what's in it, but talk about it. And look, we understand we've all been to book clubs. There's always that one person who never reads the book, but they bring a good casserole, so they keep getting invited back or whatever it is. But we are curious, just so we know how to adjust the level of our engagement here. Avery's got a poll that he's going to put up for us. Avery, do you want to do that? Let's find out where we're at here with the
Yeah, I do have a
our
poll, but
audience.
Blair, I need you to make me co-host real quick so I can launch that.
So
Or you
demanding.
could launch it.
Can I? I
I
don't know
think
if
you
I
can,
can.
yeah.
Polls, quizzes. No, you know what? I'm gonna
All
make
right.
you I'm gonna make you in charge.
Well, we
There you
get
go,
this up
Avery.
in the chat. You're posting how many, what's the head count of your firm?
I'm not even a co-host. Whatever, fine. So I've read the four conversations, own it, but haven't read it. Planning to buy and read it. Books aren't my thing.
For the purposes of this, audiobooks are books. There isn't a Four Conversations audiobook, is there? Or is, oh, you did do that.
Recorded in this very studio by this very
With
author.
this very microphone. All right, the answers are streaming in.
Okay, that's great. So about 60% have read it.
John needs a
60 and
halfway
dropping.
through the book option. Tracy's also in the middle.
The dog ate my homework should have been one.
Yeah.
Books aren't my thing. Well, there's only two people in this group of what are we, little over 200 who say books aren't my thing, and you showed up to book club. So I think that's fine. I'm happy to have everybody here. Just that's really helpful to us. Thank you.
Darius thinks the audiobook was really good, by the way. So never mind that I forgot it existed. Darius really liked it.
I am not an audiobook person. Um, I listen to podcasts all day long, not audiobooks.
All right. So what we're going to do today is we got a good sense of the room. Thank you for everybody, regardless of how you voted. All are welcome, except that one person. Uh, what we're going to do is, as always, we're going to use the chat in today's session for just your random ongoing conversations, especially with each other. One of the great things about the Win Without Pitching community is you've got a lot of really knowledgeable, experienced folks in here. And so feel free to pipe in there with your own thoughts about what we're saying. The Q&A button, if you can distinguish between those two, chat for chat and Q&A to ask a question that you want us to address. That helps us keep track of things. The chat often moves pretty fast. So folks earlier on were posting in the chat the size of their firm, the head count, 1 to 1 million. But Blair, let's get into this week. You're going to cover some of the basic concepts, and then we're going to get into it. How you want to start?
How do I want to start? I want to hit this button. Hey. Okay, the Four Conversations Book Club, the value conversation. I'm always looking for an image. I need one more image for next week. So if you have an image of a dog-eared version of the book or the book in an interesting context, please go ahead and send it to me, Blair at winwithoutpitching.com. The Four Conversations, who are we, why are we here? This is the book that 58% of you have read. The Four Conversations, a new model for selling expertise. Why does the sale of expertise require a different model for selling? Well, the answer is because in any sale of expertise, the sale is the sample of the engagement to follow. It says everything to the client about what they're buying and how they're going to work with you. And it's where you start to take control. I don't think I said this in the book, but because I think I heard this from a friend of mine when the book was in production already written. But I've been repeating this line for a few months now because I think it's absolutely brilliant. The prospect's mind is malleable. The client's mind is fixed. And there's so much information, so much value wrapped up in that statement. The prospect's mind is malleable. The client's mind is fixed. So what does that mean? How do we leverage that? We leverage that by taking control of the engagement in the sale itself. And if we can identify, this is me going on a tangent already. If we can identify the problems that we tend to encounter in our engagements once we're hired, or even later in the engagement when we're trying to close in the closing conversation, later in the sale when we're trying to close in the closing conversation, then we can get ahead of those early in the sale. We can get ahead of those in the qualifying conversation by saying, this is how we work. And last week in the qualifying conversation. But this is what we're doing. We're talking about this book, a quick review of the Four Conversations, or the model. Remember, all models are wrong. Some are helpful. So our model is that we view the sale as a series of 4 linear and discrete conversations. And reality isn't always that way. In fact, it's probably the majority of the time, it's not that way. It's not 4 conversations. They don't all neatly follow each other. Whoops. Did I go backwards? Yes, I did. All right. So 4 conversations. This is our model. We recognize that the power of the model is not its veracity. It's in the fact that it's helpful, or can be helpful, for us to think of the sale as 4 conversations. So at any point in the sale, we simply stop and ask ourselves, wait a minute, what conversation is this? It's the value conversation. Okay, what's my objective in this conversation? Well, in the value conversation, as we'll review in a minute, it's to see if we can determine the value to be created, and then the share of that value that we might command in the form of fees. Okay, so I know what my objective is. What framework do I use? I use the value conversation framework. In addition to frameworks, there's this idea of principles. Principles are the ideas that we embody as we use a framework to navigate to a conversation's objective. So this is a book, a model, that is a system of frameworks and principles. With each conversation has a framework or set of frameworks, and it has some principles that we embody. Last week in the qualifying conversation, in the book, I lay out like the body of most of the key principles in the qualifying conversation, because it's the second conversation, but it's the first person-to-person conversation. And the principles that we introduce at the beginning of that conversation are the principles that we carry throughout the sale. And then there's one different one. This is one thing that's different from a principle point of view in the qualifying conversation. And that is, in a qualifying conversation, your tone is one of discernment. Here in the value conversation, that tone changes. You go from discerning, does this make sense for me? Should we be applying resources against this opportunity? To deeply interested, because if you're having a value conversation with somebody, they are qualified in. The next step that you determined at the end of the qualifying conversation was to have a value conversation, either with this decision maker in this moment, or you set it up you set up the conversation with the right people afterwards. The right people might mean you might be the qualifier in your firm, but you're a junior person who brings in somebody more senior to have a value conversation. More often, that means that they're missing decision makers on the client side. So, and this might come up in the questions, and feel free to enter your questions at any time. But there's this issue of you've got somebody, you've qualified this in, you have one decision maker, but you've identified there are missing decision makers. Should you have a value conversation with that one decision maker in that moment? The short answer, I think, is yes, if you have time and it makes sense to do so. I mean, generally, it makes sense to do so. And then you would set it up to have the same conversation with the missing decision makers. That's not a hard and fast rule, just a preference of mine. Okay, let's quickly review the 4 conversations and their objectives. The probative conversation is the most different one. This is the conversation that happens without you present through your agents of thought leadership and referrers, the rural juror. The objective of the probative conversation is to prove your expertise to the client and then move in their mind from this position of vendor, where you have very little power in the buy-sell relationship, to the position of the expert. And so that's done through your strategy, your positioning, and your lead generation. And the goal of the probative conversation is to drive inbound inquiries to you with you already positioned as the expert. So remember, we have this dichotomy that we set up. You can either be, if dichotomy is the right word, you can either be seen as the expert or a vendor. And so that's a generalization that we like to make. Reality is it's more like a spectrum, but we like this binary system of if you're not the expert, then you're a vendor. You're in the power position or you have very little power. The second conversation and the first person-to-person conversation is the qualifying conversation. This is the vetting conversation where you vet the lead to see if an opportunity exists, determine the next steps, while maintaining the expert position. That last part, the secondary objective, is a function of the primary objective of the probative conversation. Has the flip happened? Have you moved from vendor to expert? If so, while you're accomplishing or pursuing the objective of the qualifying conversation, you make sure you do not give up that high ground. Implied in this is if the probative conversation hasn't happened, and sometimes it does not happen, and the opportunity comes to you or you reach out to and uncover the opportunity from the vendor position, then you're looking, in addition to your primary objective, you're looking for the flip to happen. How do you make that happen? You use the frameworks and you embody the principles. It's that simple. The third conversation, which we'll be talking about today, which might be my favorite, is the value conversation. And our objective here, your objective, is to determine the value that you might create and the share of that value you might command in the form of fees while maintaining the expert position. Now, we'll get into this. Some of you have productized your services and you've priced the services. But still, I want you to have a value conversation. I actually think, and I didn't say this in Pricing Creativity, but I've been saying it a lot recently. I think it's more important that you learn to master the value conversation. I think that's more important than your pricing model. I'll go a step further just for the sake of effect and say, I don't care how you price, or I care a lot less about how you price than I do about you embracing, practicing, and getting good at the value conversation. You do this, I say in the book, I say it in training. I think this is the second most valuable skill you will learn in business after whatever your domain expertise is. I think value conversation mastery is transformative. It will transform your financial fortunes regardless of how you price. And we'll get into that. And then the fourth conversation, which we will cover next week, is the closing conversation, where your objective is to help the client select and commit to a path forward while maintaining the expert position in the relationship. So today it's all value conversation, where we endeavor to determine the value that we might help to create for our clients and the share of that value we might command in the form of fees while maintaining the expert position. So what does this mean? These two highlighted statements determine the value that we might create. The share that we might command is our price. So how much value might we create? And again, value is, we can think of it in terms of economic value and non-economic forms of value or emotional value. But how much value might we create for this client? And then as a result of that, how much might we charge? So what we're doing is we're setting pricing guidance here. We're not setting prices in the value conversation. We're setting pricing guidance. We're beginning the pricing discussion based on the value that might be created, regardless of how we're charging. Regardless of how we're charging. And if you can learn to do this, it's a very simple framework, as those who've read the book know, but there's a lot of nuance to it. And those of you who have practiced it and tried to put it into practice have probably also discovered that it does take some practice. This is the key takeaway from this conversation, the value conversation, and the discussion that we're having today is, I would like you to practice this enough and get through the 2 or 3 early failures. You're going to fail. You're going to be frustrated. You're going to be tempted to discard it, the value conversation, and go back to old ways. I really want you to push through this because it is transformative. You come out the other side, it is transformative. And if anybody has some experiences that they can speak to briefly in the chat about what it's done for you, I would really appreciate it if you shared some of those stories. I mean, I get them all the time, and some of them are pretty powerful. So that's the value conversation, what we're talking about today. So principles and frameworks, there are really 2 principles introduced here, but I've added a third one because I talked about, I didn't specifically, I didn't call it out as a principle, but it's handled in the principle section. And that's the delivery and pricing models. But there's this tone of deep interest. So they're qualified in, when we're in qualifying mode, we're professional. We have this framework. We're asking the business-like questions that we need to get answered to determine if there's a fit here suitable enough to take a next step. So we're a little bit clinical. And I overemphasize this when I'm modeling it because I really want to slap down your childlike glee, your natural tendency to become ebullient, enthusiastic, fake smile plastered on your face because you want this so bad. I want you to rein in that needy vendor behavior in the qualifying conversation. And I want you to show up like a professional with a framework, deciding if this is worth your time or not. Now, don't overplay that idea. I tend to overplay it. But that's the tone I would like you to have in the qualifying conversation. Here, that is replaced by a tone of deep interest. So I'll just model this again. Librarian Blair finishing the qualifying conversation. And then he says, you know what? I think there's a really good fit here. What you're looking for, it's right in our sweet spot. I could see my team getting very excited about this. Let me ask you a few more questions. Now I'm leaning in. I am now allowing myself to become deeply interested in you and your situation. And in training, I don't remember if I talked about this in the book, but I have a friend. Her name is Anne. I haven't seen her for years. We all have friends or family members like this. And she could sell me anything. She doesn't, but I'm fond of saying my love for her is disproportionate to any time I've ever spent with her. But my experience with her, and I use her as a surrogate. I have other friends like this, but she's the one I always think of. You have this friend where you meet them, you run into them, and they're so happy to see you. And they ask you all the questions. Oh my God, how are you? Where you've been, etc. And they make you feel fantastic. And then it's like, oh my God, look at the time. I've got to go give my love to the family. And they leave. You feel amazing. You have this deep sense of love for this person. And then you go tell your spouse. In my case, I'll go home and tell Colette, hey, I ran into Anne. Oh my God, how's Anne? I don't know. Because Anne did it to me again. Right? Anne made the conversation all about me. Like I was the only person in the world. You take that skill that deep interest about somebody and you transpose it into a business context without becoming the needy vendor, you go from discerning professional to deeply interested. That is the most valuable skill in all of business. And that's the place we'd like to get to. So it's a tone of deep interest. The next principle is we are transcending solutions and focusing on value. And I think I modeled this last week in a qualifying conversation. Client comes to you self-diagnosed and self-prescribed. You look at what they want, you go, great, thanks. Set it aside. Let me ask you a few questions. And you transcend the solution. And that's what we're doing here in the value conversation. So the first step of the qualifying conversation, the first quadrant in the qualifying conversation framework, is also the first step in the value conversation framework, where in the qualifying conversation, we're uncovering the desired future state. Here, we're committing the client to the desired future state. So if you look at the framework on the right, and that simply means recapping the desired future state that you uncovered in the qualifying conversation, and then asking them, is this correct? Did I miss anything? Now, you might have multiple decision makers. So you're in a first conversation with a missing senior decision maker that wasn't in the qualifying conversation. So now you're uncovering desired future state again. So the step technically is to commit the client to the desired future state. In training, we have you uncover it. It's better practice. So we're transcending solutions, and this pursuit of the desire, trying to uncover the client's desired future state, that's us putting their specified solutions aside and trying to get to the heart of what is it that they really want. And then the third principle that I didn't really call out as a principle, but it's worth talking about, is this idea of delivery models and pricing models, specifically customization versus standardization. So when you standardize your delivery model, to me, that's productizing your services. When you standardize your pricing model, you're pricing those services, those products or services. A customized delivery model is every opportunity is a blank slate. Customized pricing model is we're pricing the client. So you do have to make a decision on those two dimensions of delivery and pricing. Are we standardized or customized? And we talk about this for 1 minute, but there's a lot wrapped up in there. We could do a whole workshop on it. There are two frameworks here, the value conversation framework. You see the 4 steps here. And then the 3-option proposal. So some of you who've read Pricing Creativity recognize some of the work from Pricing Creativity covered, the basics covered in the 4 conversations. The 3-option proposal, limited to 1 page, right? Right. And you can make a comment or ask a question about that. But I think I'll stop right there, hand it back to Adrian, and then let's take your questions.
Great. You're going to turn off your screen share. Awesome. Nice to see you. Okay. So I've been telling people we're going to talk more about proposals next time in the in the closing conversation. Do you want to get into proposal details today? I feel like there's a lot already. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I do, because in training, we cover proposal. So technically, your proposal development is in the gap between the value conversation and the closing conversation. In training, we cover it on day 4. But in the book, it's covered in the value conversation. So let's get to proposal conversations today. We'll also get to proposal and pricing conversations next week too.
Yeah, it's one of those things where both in real life, in your practice of the 4 conversations, and also in training, the proposal design really comes between 2 conversations. So it's a judgment call where we're going to talk about it. So we're going to talk about it today. Excellent. All right, we got a lot of great questions here, and I've been trying to sort through them as we go here and sort of bundle them. There's a few that I'd like to just have you knock off quickly at the beginning that have to do with sort of more general, like when and how and if sorts of things, and then we'll get into the details. So for example, Melissa says, I have 5 prospects in the pipeline. Is it too late to start using the model and frameworks, at what point does it become too late?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm so glad you asked it. Comes up in training. So I always say in training, there's a line in time, and the line is today. Before today, it's old ways, old prices, old behaviors. After today, it's new ways, new prices, new behaviors. If you suddenly, so I'll make the generalization about vendor behavior and expert behavior. If you've been behaving like a vendor to this point in the sale, and then you drop into a Win Without Pitching workshop or book club, and you get a shot of kind of adrenaline to the spine, stiffness to the spine, and you go back with your head held high and start behaving in a way that's incongruent with the way you previously behaved, what you watch this thing blow up. You do have to be careful, be very, very careful. So was there a specific, I didn't see the question, Adrian, but was there a
Is it too late?
specific
At what
ask?
point? Yeah, at what point would you say you've gone too far down the path? But I think the answer is not a timing one. It's really what you said. If you can start to introduce these principles and these expert behaviors without it being such a jarring shift, like you don't want the client to experience you are a different person, right?
Yeah.
So don't do that. Um, but is it ever too late? Well, yes. If you've already said, sure, I'll send you a proposal and then given them a 50-page deck, you're past the point of no return for this approach. Prior to that, you could probably begin to at least integrate some of the core ideas. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think, I mean, this is where I'd say trust your intuition. You've been
Yeah.
showing up as a certain person, a certain way so far. Don't, whatever you do, if you're going to make some adjustments, make sure they are not jarring. And just translate it into a personal context. You've got a friend who behaves a certain way. One day they show up and they're entirely different. And you think, are you on cocaine? Are you manic depressive?
Did you
What's
just
going
do
on?
the
This
Win Without Pitching workshop? What is happening to you? All right. So Rose has a question I can answer for you very quickly. Are you having the value conversation on the same call where you're qualifying, or is that a different call, or do you qualify before the call? So Rose, it really depends. Typically, and the way Blair talks about the model, these are four discrete and linear conversations. In real life, nothing is that neat and organized, but you should always qualify before having the value conversation. You can do those both in the same call if the qualifying conversation concludes with you both determining there's a fit and you have the time and you move directly into, well, let's look together now at the value we could create. You can do that all in one call, but qualifying always before. All right, Chad asks, and again, let's knock these out quickly so we can get into the nitty gritty. But I'm sorry, Chad asks, what kinds of businesses and contexts are not amenable to the four conversations model? What should the expert do when wanting to add value and bring the principles of four conversation to such contexts? And I would add, if there are any.
Yeah, I'll just note there's some really great questions in the chat. Can you put, if you want us to
Yeah,
address your questions, can you put them in the Q&A, as
thank
Adrian
you.
said? There's somebody had a comment about, oh,
Yeah, I'll
maybe,
go look for it.
yeah,
Any
no, that's fine.
businesses or contexts that don't fit this?
So there are lots of expert businesses where it just would not make sense to have, um, sorry, where you could do all three conversations in one. If you've got productized services and you've priced the product, then you can close. You get on a call with somebody, you can close pretty quickly. And I think there would be some businesses where the principles still apply, but you don't want to be guilty of unnecessarily over elaborating on a sales process. I have seen this happen, not firsthand, but um, I've had clients explain how a deal went wrong to me, and I thought, why are you, and I know the answer, but my observation was, oh, you're getting too granular on process. You're dragging out a sale unnecessarily long. So typically, my sales conversations, I think of the first conversation as a hybrid qualifying value conversation. I almost, not always, but almost always have the decision maker present, or at least one of the decision makers, the flip has usually happened. So I qualify real quickly. And I know I try to model how this should be done. And I have to, I have to kind of remind myself, no, show them what a qualifying conversation feels like. Show them model for them what a value conversation feels like. But the reality is, if I spend too much time teaching this in a sale, I drag the sale out too long. So I have these hybrid conversations. And obviously, I know the material well, and I can truncate these things. And very often I'm guilty of truncating them too much, moving too quickly and making too many assumptions. But you do have to just take the principles and you have to bend it to your business. So I would encourage you to do that. And if it doesn't feel right, where there's no like, so for example, if you're having a qualifying conversation with a senior decision maker, an executive in a business, or the client in a financial planning relationship, there's some businesses where you wouldn't ask the budget question in the qualifying conversation, because a financial planner can use liquid net worth, assets under management, et cetera, as a surrogate for budget. So you wouldn't even ask that question. And even in a creative business, if you have the executive who has the ability to bring untold resources to this, and you're going to move from a qualifying conversation into a value conversation, you can skip at times the budget question, the fourth quadrant of the qualifying conversation. So the short answer is yes. There are lots of times when you can abbreviate, change, drop something, and I would encourage you to bring your own intuition to that.
There are a number of questions here about the decision makers, who's involved in this conversation. I've got at least 6 or 7. So let me just capture some of these, and we'll try to hit some of the key points, Blair, in a consolidated answer. Anonymous asks, what's the lowest level of client you can have this conversation with?
It's a great question.
Because you're talking about creating future value. Obviously, the higher you get towards the C-suite, the more that's what they're tasked with, as opposed to spending an existing budget. Claire asks, you mentioned that executives tend to love the value conversation. Does that mean you support the idea that our positioning should speak to a higher level executive in the company? So similar thing there. And then there are a few others about what happens when a new decision maker gets added to the mix at this particular point. And Pete has a fun one. I'll just end with this. Does it matter really who these people are and what their background is? What if the decision maker you're going to be speaking to is an ex-McKinsey consultant?
Oh, even better. So if they're an executive, if they're a consultant, if they have a high level of business sophistication, if they're innovative, if they like to open to taking risk, if they have an entrepreneurial bent to them at all, this is all better. It's actually the other end of the spectrum, where they're less senior, they're more systematic and process oriented. So I think I say this in a book or something like it, but a friend of mine said to me years ago, he said, employees are worried about the past, something that happened in the past. Oh, like so-and-so got fired for doing this. Managers are worried about the present, bringing projects in on time and on budget. And only executives are charged with the future. So these conversations are better with executives. They're responsible.
Also, only executives get fired if they don't deliver the future.
Right. And they can bring extra resources. So so you go to the manager level, should you be having this conversation with somebody at management level? Yeah, and I'm immediately recalling a bunch of conversations that my clients have told me about, where they uncover a larger vision, and then you have to set up at the end of the value conversation. So let's say the client's got a budget of 100K, and don't read too much into the number. I could pick 10K, I could pick $1 million. Let's say they got a budget of 100K, and in the desired future state, you uncover opportunity to create millions of dollars in value, and you're dealing with a manager. You've identified there's missing decision makers. You can't get to them. You've moved, or you haven't got to them yet. Maybe they've even indicated that that's not likely to happen. but you've otherwise determined this is a good fit. You move to a value conversation with this manager. They get excited about this vision of future success. You get excited about it. And the way you wrap up a value conversation and set up the closing conversation is you say, okay, now I understand. Think of the 4 steps of the framework. I understand what you want. I understand the value to be created. Sorry, I understand the things that we'll measure to prove that your success. I understand that the value that we might create. And we've had initial conversation around pricing from high to low. I'm going to go away, come back, and with different options on how you can engage us to help you create this value at different price points. So that we're setting up this closing conversation that way. We're telling them we're coming back with different options. Now, let's say in step 4 of the value conversation with your manager, with the manager client, you say, okay, so if we could help you create, it looks like there's like 5 million a year in recurring net profit if all of this happens. Yeah, maybe, it's low millions. Okay, and so step 4, pricing guidance, you anchor high and say, well, if we could do this for you, would you pay us $2 million or $1 million? And the client says, listen, Blair, I understand that there's a lot of value that might be created here, and this is all very exciting to talk about. But the truth is, I have a project, and that project has a budget of $100,000. So back to the question, should you be even having this value conversation with this person in this moment? Yes, absolutely you should, because now you will effectively make a trade. So I'm back in the salesperson role. I say to you, you're the manager, Adrian, and you've just said to me, listen, yeah, this is fun conversation, but I have 100K for this project. I might say to you, okay, I understand that. As part of our proposal, when we reconvene, I'll show you what we can do for 100K. But in exchange, so note those words, in exchange, I'm making a trade with you. I would like permission to think creatively and expansively, and these are words I like too, permission to think creatively and expansively about the most that we could do to help you create this value. I understand you don't have the authority to sign off on anything above $100,000. My goal is to put something so novel, so interesting, so profound in front of you that you are inspired to go to your team members and senior people to loop them into the conversation because you feel in that moment like you want to make the case for more resources to think about doing this in another way. And you might say, oh, well, I'll make that trade, but I can't even imagine the scenario where I get so excited that I want to bring this to my boss. Have you met my boss? And I say, okay, that's fine. I appreciate that. I appreciate you letting me think creatively and expansively about what's the most we can do to create this value. And I look forward, smile on my face. I look forward to putting you in the uncomfortable position where you think, damn, I'm going to try to sell this to my boss. That's all I can ask in this moment. So back to the question, should you be having the conversation at a low level? Yeah, you should. Now, somebody lower than a manager, employees, a gatekeeper, don't even bother. Your job in the qualifying conversation is to get to the senior decision makers. Now, where is that level? Where is that cutoff? I don't know. Trust your gut on that.
Yeah. See if there's any in this cluster that we missed. What changes when you've had your qualifying conversation with one prospect and then new people are added to the mix?
Yeah, that's a messy, fluid situation. Just embrace the messiness of it. The thing about models is we're guilty of thinking the map is the territory and that everything actually unfolds this way. We have frameworks and principles, and we use these frameworks and principles. And a friend of mine says, "You're in the ring, you got a box. You're in the ring, you got like you didn't plan for this situation. Use the frameworks and principles, and just put one foot in front of the other." I'm not sure if that answered the question.
Yeah, I think it does. And also, I would point out that the example that Blair walks through in the book with kind of created dialogue to walk through the whole thing, it fits this situation where the decision maker you're talking to wasn't in the early one. You recap, ask them their desired future state, and then get into from there. That's what they want. Then the metrics, how will we measure that? The value to be created. That example is really well laid out in the book. Okay, there's
Adrian, we
several
have
others,
a
but I want go ahead.
so if I may, so just while you were talking there, I picked through some things here. There are a few questions on non-economic forms of value. So somebody in a nonprofit, somebody I I don't know if it was interior design, and I think I mentioned this last week. We do a lot of work in kind of the interior design and residential architecture space where none of that value is economic, right? So do you still have a value conversation? You still have a value conversation. But so the example, okay, let's use the not for profit example. The the not for profit creates value in the world. That value does not usually does not accrue. It does not translate to financial value that accrues to the organization, but that's okay. It's basically so if you think of residential architecture, or let's take interior design. I love this example. You're walking your client, you're an interior designer with a homeowner, somebody who's got could be a new home build, it could be a renovation. You're walking them through the steps in the process. What do you want? What's the desired future state? So we asked the Dan Sullivan 3-year question to get them into their desired future state. Then we ask, what are the metrics? Okay, well, what are the things? And you're asking this question, maybe not even having any idea. Now, if you're an interior designer, you have an idea. But you're asking the question, what are the metrics? You don't need to know what the metrics are. But the client might not know either. So then you have to start facilitating in a conversation. Well, what about this? So, what's my desired future state? I entertain more. I have my family home for the holidays. Okay, so let's what are the metrics? How often do you entertain now? Zero. In this beautiful new world we've described, how often are you entertaining? I'm having a dinner party once a month. Okay, let's use that. Once a month. Family home for the holidays. What family, what holidays? So the kids next Christmas, I don't know, you're identifying the metrics. And then you move to value. And you don't know because value is personal. Value, at the end of the day, value is nothing more than a feeling. It is a sense of regard. Adrian, what's the value to you of this?
I mean, it's gonna make my wife really happy because this is what she's wanted always.
Yeah, I get that. And just think of all the other, it's going to make my wife's going to be so happy. She's going to be so goddamn happy. And if I wanted to be really direct and predatory, I would say, how much money would you spend to make your wife that happy? But
You
because
would,
that,
wouldn't you?
without me framing it that way, that is the question.
Yeah,
And the
yeah.
answer has nothing to do with putting a monetary value on my wife's happiness. The answer has everything to do with Adrian's willingness to pay. And so I can use willingness as a surrogate for willingness to pay. I can look around at the house. I can get a sense of his lifestyle. I can get a sense of his disposable income, and I can price accordingly based on that. And it's the same thing in a not-for-profit. Larger organizations, you have a sense of how they're funded, what they're typically spend money on. If you're value pricing or pricing let's call it pricing the client. You're pricing the client in this situation. What you're simply trying to do is avoiding underpricing the larger client because this is what you've charged a smaller client, right? Generally speaking, larger clients, you're creating more value. You should be charging them more.
Yeah. Okay, we got a bunch of questions here on pricing and value and things that are all connected to this. Quite honestly, we're not going to be able to get to all of them. This is such a rich topic. So a few things here, specifically related to what you're saying. And let's, without repeating ourselves, let's see if we can add anything here. If the client's struggling to answer the question about 3 years out, or they're giving you vague answers, someone else says, the client genuinely doesn't have any idea. You've answered that. The client doesn't have clear metrics or quantitative measures. Should we help define these metrics for them? Should we
Yes.
encourage the client to determine those metrics? Yes. And I would just add, and you make this very clear in the book, you should guide them, but it's not your job to figure out the metric. It's not your
Right.
job to assign the value. In fact, given the fact that everyone perceives value differently, value is perceived, not inherent.
You
Um,
can point out a surrogate,
yeah,
right? So
yeah.
employee retention or employee happiness. Well, retention, what about retention? What about an NPS score?
Now, this is a good one from Colin because it's related, but it's not the same. And I think it's really valuable. I'd love to better understand how to uncover value in scenarios where financial outcomes for the client can't be directly correlated to the work we do. For example, creative post-production services for film, ad, or TV. So you do something, you know it's going to make a difference, but there's no direct correlation, there's no attribution to your work. How do
It's
you?
the same idea as the interior. Like it basically, if you can't make a direct correlation to the financial value being created, then you have to go on willingness to pay. I
Right.
mean, I will point out that's a dangerous business to be in right now, isn't it? And it's
Yeah, actually,
highly
there's another
commodified.
good one. I'm not sure if I copied it out, but anyway, let's go on, and then I'll look for that one. A good question here. So this is related to nonprofits. Sean says, in my government work, the whole enterprise is a cost. There's no monetary value or revenue for the organization. If I try to attach monetary value to my work, I end up in the cost saving or efficiency framework, which isn't exciting or glamorous. You are selling to government, you do know. And it tend to be automating away people's jobs, which is a bittersweet sell. Is there another value route to take in public cost based organizations? In other words, aside from saving money, how can you get government, public um, clients to see different forms of value?
Yeah. So I don't be embarrassed about or shy about the value of cost savings, especially in government. Um, I think of, some of the, I think cost savings are easier to value price than uh, revenue increases because you can
Right.
measure it and everybody gets all the all the accountants just geek out on this, right? I'm fond of saying that, the last value priced consulting engagement in any organization is one of the big consulting companies going in and selling a strategic sourcing initiative that promises to cut costs by $10 million a year, and they price it at $5 million. I mean, it's easy to measure cost reductions. We should also not forget other forms of value creation, like knowledge transfer. I don't know if this applies to the questioner, but I wrote about this in the academy recently. I don't remember if I covered it in the book or not. We don't we don't appropriately price knowledge transfer. I was at this procurement conference I was at maybe it was a couple months ago now. Somebody was on the stage talking about how they had an internal creative and developer department or departments working away at a really big problem, but it was really hard. So they brought in an agency for 6 months and did all the hard work and got their team up to speed, basically upskilled their team. And I turned to the finance director at a large agency who was a client of mine sitting next to me. And I said, do you think the agency got paid for knowledge transfer? And he said, no way. They probably sold that based on labor. Knowledge transfer, the idea, the promise that we'll come in and we'll help you do it so that after we leave, your people can do this moving forward. Put a price on the savings of that. And I've had multiple procurement people tell me they They really value knowledge transfer, and they almost always get it for free. But they make the case internally. When they show their savings internally, they price knowledge transfer.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And for those of us that don't, like myself, I don't typically sell to large organizations that have professional buyers, procurement departments. Um, but I realized when we were talking about this that the core premise of my own approach to the work I do with my clients is that they won't need me when we're done. And that in the process of doing the work, I'm also training their people to carry on doing the work. And it occurred to me, I have never thought about the value of that. Um,
Yeah.
I've just thought, oh, isn't that nice? They'll love that, right? And they
Yeah.
do, but they don't
Paul
pay
has a
for it.
good question. Wonder if you've missed this. If you're seeking compensation based on the value you create, does that imply you'd be expected to guarantee a specific return on investment, even though you don't control all aspects of the situation? No, it could, but it doesn't necessarily imply. So you think of value-based pricing, and I want to be clear here that I don't think value-based pricing is the solution for everybody or all firms, maybe not even the majority of firms. But I do want you to think about pricing the client, and I do want you to have a value conversation where you're beginning the pricing discussion based on the value to be created. That gets both parties into the right mindset. So, where did the question go?
Oh, I just moved it. But it's because, Paul, I had seen it. It was on my other page. So if you're seeking compensation based on the value you create, does that imply you'd be expected to guarantee a
Yeah.
specific
So,
return?
so you've got value creation, which is a price set based on the value to be created. And then the client might ask for guarantees. Then now you're moving into the area of performance pay, which is a form of value-based pricing. It's a higher form of value-based pricing. And so if you think of on the risk reward spectrum, low risk, like basically you push all the risk to the client. You take low risk and you charge a low price. Selling time is the lowest one. The highest one is you think of value-based pricing, and then there's performance pay within value-based pricing, and then all the way out to the extreme is contingency payment. You don't get paid anything until you perform, right? Now, you don't have to do contingency. You don't have to do performance pay when you're value pricing. But you do have to, there is going to be a conversation about, well, how do I know these outcomes? I'm going to get these outcomes. Ideally, you're a specialized firm and you say, well, here's our historical track record. Here are our case studies. That should be good enough. If you're doing something for the first time where you don't have that track record, you might have to put some compensation at risk. But anytime you're putting compensation at risk, let's say you put $1 at risk. Let's say you decide the fee would be X. Let's say the fee is $100. And the client says, I want you to put $10 at risk. So I pay you 90 and you earn the 10 if you hit certain benchmarks. You should get paid the opportunity, the upside should be multiples of that 10. Does that make sense? It's probably a little bit advanced. That's a deeper, advanced pricing conversation. But the
All right.
short answer is no, you do not necessarily need to get dragged into performance pay. You can go there if you want.
Yeah, it's interesting to establish an upper limit of, well, what would we do and what would we be willing to put at stake? And you've made the point many, many times. It's in numerous podcast episodes and other forms of content that profit follows risk. So figuring out the way risk is shared is useful. We can't get into the details of that. Now, Blair, you wanted me to remind you at 10 till we're past that. We have a bunch of questions. We are going to stick around a little extra. I have
Yeah.
two in particular I want to ask next, one from Aaron and one from Jeremy that go together. But I want to have you do what you wanted to do. For the folks that aren't able to stick around and will catch the last bit of this in a recording, what did you want to say before we end?
Yeah, so I'll put a bow around this and talk about how you can get some more resources on it. And then we'll come back and we'll stick around for another 10 or 15 minutes to take more questions. I'll also point out that last week, I'm going to do this again today. I took some of the unanswered questions, 5 or 6 of the better unanswered questions, and I wrote them in a blog post and sent it out. So the post tomorrow will cover another 5 or 6 unanswered questions that we don't get to today. And I have all of those questions, and some of them I'm answering in the Win Without Pitching Academy, where I blog daily. Um, let's talk about value conversation mastery. What does it take to master the conversation? It's pretty simple. So in a firm of multiple people, the first thing you have to do is you have to assign value conversation responsibility. Who in the organization is going to have value conversation? You can delegate qualifying to a pretty low level, a junior employee. I'm actually quite a big fan of that, provided they have the right personality. Value conversation responsibility is people more senior in the organization. And in small firms, it's probably the principal, not necessarily, or one of the most senior people in the organization. Here, we talk about recording and reviewing qualifying conversations and closing conversations too. I really encourage you to do this, to review your value conversations. And so if you're doing a self-reflection, review them with somebody else and have somebody on your team or a friend, a study buddy, help you with this and give you critical feedback on these conversations. I don't know what the number is, but I think there's a certain threshold once you get past 3, 4, 5 successful value conversations, you're free. You are transformed. You are on the road to a better future. There is a lot of, it's going to vary from person to person, but expect and embrace the failure and the suffering that will come from novice value conversations. If of everything that we teach, this is the one thing I would really like you to push past the difficult place. It's really the place where, where, where if I could wave my magic wand, I would just give you more, have you get more and more practice. How do you practice? Well, you practice in training. We've got workshops. We've got other ways of delivering training too. I want to take a little bit, I've talked about the academy a little bit. I just want to show you a picture of it. Some of you have been through training and have academy access. So the Win Without Pitching Academy is our post-training support place. We've got a lot going on, maybe a little bit too much going on, access to all your training materials, the global discussion forum, kind of like the chat going on here, but with people who've been through training. So the quality of the answers that you're getting from your peers is very high. Content library, all my blog posts, podcasts, videos, etc. And again, this is also where I blog daily, and that's available only in the Academy, plus the Win Without Pitching mobile app. You also get beta access to Academy Live. So what's Academy Live? It's once a month. I take one of these really narrow principles or steps in a framework and go deep into it. So it's kind of like this, but instead of an hour on the value conversation, I think is it next week? Maybe it's tomorrow. No, it's tomorrow. For an hour, I go deep and 1 hour deep into uncovering desired future state. So everything about that 3-year question, the follow-up framework, and then all of the discussions around that. So there are hundreds of possible topics. We pick a narrow one and we go deep into it. That's live lesson. This is a slide we share in training just about what we're trying to do with the academy. So what I say at the end of the value conversation, day 3, is like, you're here. This is basically the Hartner hype cycle curve, right? And coming out of here, you're going to go through the trough of disillusionment, the slough of despond, because you're going to have these new ideas, new frameworks. You're going to be applying them. You're going to feel fantastic, and then you're going to run into trouble. And this is going to happen in the value conversation more than anywhere else. And you're going to be frustrated. You'll go back to old ways. You won't have value conversations because it's hard. And you'll be so pissed off at yourself because you will know there's a better way. So that's what training does, and that's why we built the academy, is to basically flatten that out. Workshops, the number one way to get trained, it's 12 hours. It's 12 hours and $2,500. If you're in, so we do them online. The next one is July. I lead the quarterly online workshops. It says 7th to 11th because it's 7th to 10th in the Americas, and it's 8th to 11th in Asia Pacific. So this one's later in the day. so our friends down under can attend. But we are doing two in real life workshops, one in Buenos Aires in Spanish and one in London in English. So the Spanish one is being led by our coach, Eze Applebaum, and the English one in London is being led by our London coach, Aaron Hutchinson. So you get more information at each of these. So, okay, so that's all I wanted to share with you. If you have any questions on this, feel free to email me on training or the academy. Feel free to email me at blair@winwithoutpitching.com. I'll stop sharing, Adrian, and then let's go
Yeah,
another 10 or 15 minutes, uh, as long as the questions are there and
they
time
are.
flies.
There are many, many questions. It just reminds me how um, models are useful, but they're most useful when you use them. And you can use them to think with. I think that's the original point of the George Box quote, but you can use them in practice, which we highly, highly recommend. So we're thinking through some things here, but getting in the ring, so you have to box, is the way to do it. All right, a pair of questions. Aaron asked, I've had two clients that I believe were a good fit, but I lost them when I tried to guide the pricing. Does this mean I haven't done the first two conversations properly, or I just need to practice, or do I just need a nice collared shirt? Never hurts to have a collared shirt. I'm a t-shirt man myself. Jeremy asked, I've had two instances, so another two, hopefully not the same two, where the client has been overwhelmed by where we got to in the value conversation, that only came out in the closing conversation. They didn't tell you.
Yeah.
In both instances, they said something like, we were looking for a more off-the-shelf solution, even though the lower end solution of the three option proposal was arguably kind of that. They both ended up going another way. Okay, so people falling out at this point.
Yeah, that last one is interesting. We're looking for a more off-the-shelf solution. Has the model pushed you to a more customized solution than is appropriate for your business? And it's possible that, if I think of pricing creativity, 8.5 years old now, I wrote that book on the assumption that the best model that was for creative firms, the best model was bespoke services. And I now no longer think that. I don't think bespoke services are wrong, but I think for a variety of reasons, um, productization of services makes a lot more sense today. I've written about this recently. If you haven't seen the blog post, Avery will find it, dig it up, and post a link um, in the chat. And I talk about the reasons a little bit in the book. So, what I don't mention is AI. In the era of AI, you just can no longer price labor. You just can't do it because the work is getting done faster and faster with fewer and fewer people.
Yeah, if your
Um,
business model relied on a blended rate of, whatever,
yeah,
225 an hour or whatever, you have to rethink fundamentals here.
yeah. But Jeremy, without knowing more about the situation, I think it was Jeremy.
Hmm.
um, it sounds like things maybe have over elaborated a little bit. Try to truncate all of it. If a recurring theme is off the shelf solution, like if you heard that language from two different people, I would think, okay, that's a pattern. Hearing it once, or maybe you're combining it together under the same language. But that tells me that at the low end of the market, you should have a product. You should have a productized service. So I've mentioned financial planners a couple of times. We do a lot of work in that space because they have like armies of salespeople who need trained, and this model works very well for them. But the tendency, or at least when we're done with them, is for them to have standard packages at the low and middle. So two standard packages, and then a bespoke package for the high end. And then you can have three standard packages. So you can drop one of them for the high end and have a bespoke solution. So at the very high end of the market, you might want to think about that.
Yeah. There's a related question here. For solopreneur providing a service in a one-to-one capacity, which approach would you recommend? Standardized, customized? So I just want to emphasize, and Blair says this in the book, all of these combinations are valid. And I actually don't think we are in a position to answer this question for you. I think that's the honest answer. I have relatively standardized packages that I arrange into custom configurations with customized pricing.
Yeah.
So I fall somewhere in a hybrid model. But if somebody, that means I also know a floor. Like I know, when it comes to pricing guidance, I can say to them, well, it'll be X on the high end down to 12,000 on the low end because I know what my base package is.
Yeah.
Um, the pitfall um, that you mentioned in the book is really important to point out here. Once you have standardized your delivery, whether or not you've standardized your pricing, you may start to, in your mind, slip out of the client side value creation part of the conversation, which is the only part of the value conversation you focus on, and just start matching your solutions to what they're saying. In other words, you check out. So, however you deal with that, I do it by just forgetting about what's on my sheet, which comes naturally to me. But it's important to stay client focused, value focused, and resist slipping into solutions mode, even when clients want that. So that's the dilemma. I would
Yeah.
ask my own question here, Blair. Get a little coaching. You point out in the book, clients are looking often for solutions to procure, and consultants or agencies, firms are looking at solutions to sell. You're saying both sides are best served by not focusing on solutions. And how do you navigate that? Like, can you give us a bit of language here? What do you say to people when they are saying, well, yeah, but what are we going to get for that?
Yeah. So when you're at step four of the value conversation, you're setting pricing guidance, and they say, well, what are you going to get for that? The answer is, well, I don't know. I haven't thought about it yet. Now, that's harder to do in a productized environment. So we sell training. We have productized services, and we price the services. We don't price the client. Now, there are some exceptions to that. There's larger clients, there are other services. But generally speaking, let's just keep it simple. We have productized services and we price the service, not the client, generally speaking. The best business models out there among professional services seem to be productized services, customized prices, reserve the right to charge larger for people. Now, we're selling training, so the more people we're training, the higher the amount is. So there's some kind of surrogate there. Um, what was the question I was trying to answer, Adrian?
You
Oh,
did,
just
which you say,
modeling
well,
the
I don't know
language.
yet.
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know yet.
yeah,
I'll have a better sense. Let me ask you a few more questions.
yeah. And
Um,
I even like to say, I don't know yet. I'm trying. I haven't thought about solutions, and I got to let you know it's killing me because part of me really wants to go down the solutions rabbit hole here, but I want to stick to my framework. If we could help you create this value, and we're going to come up with internally, we're going to brainstorm a whole bunch of different ways to do this, and I'll come to you with a smaller number. But if we could help you create this value, would you pay us this much money? That's a principle that came up earlier. Make the framework visible. So I say, I don't know yet. I'm trying really hard not to think about solutions. I'm just following this framework.
um, I think just to end on this part of the conversation, I think the point you make about how there are trade-offs for every combination is the right one. And the way I tend to think about it, if you have a customized service and flexible pricing, the trade-off is you need the capacity to be able to deliver on all kinds of things, and it could be highly profitable, which is great. If you have a hybrid approach, as I do, you can still be profitable, but you have reduced some of the cognitive effort required to figure out how you're going to solve a problem. This helps me being a solo consultant because I'm not able to say, well, we could do this and this and this and just create some huge scalable thing. We're not going to deliver that. The trade-offs on the other side are, well, the worst possible trade-off is if you've fixed your pricing, but you're doing customized services, scope creep eats your profits. And the trade-off for standardized pricing with a standardized product is you need scale to be
Yeah.
profit depending on the price point, but you need scale to be profitable. So no right answer, but really important questions.
Important questions, massive, big issue, big issue. What should your delivery model be and your pricing model? And you can't do one in isolation. You have to do them both together.
So
So
on this issue
I'm
of
interviewing
proposals,
Aisha
yeah, go ahead.
Armstrong in a couple of weeks on this. She wrote the book Productize. We're going to have a conversation about that in the academy.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that one. There's a whole series of books starting with that one. And they're really about trying to get your head and your firm's culture around this shift. So if that's something you're grappling with, those books are excellent. Aisha Armstrong. Um, on this issue of proposals, there's been several sort of tactical questions. Uh, Megan asked, "How do you feel about letting the lower level person present your proposal to the ultimate decision maker versus asking to be part of the conversation?" I know how you feel about that, but let's hear your answer.
Yeah, I hate it.
Yeah.
I hate it. You could even draw a hard line, policy line around that. Um, I'm not saying you should. What you should do is you should get ruthless in the qualifying conversation. You should get ahead of these things. Identify the key decision makers, get to them get to them for a value conversation, right? But there are times, again, you're in the ring, you got a box. There are times when for whatever reason, you're going to decide you want to play ball, even though the odds are against you. You haven't been able to get access to the senior decision maker. You haven't got past this person. Your odds of winning are like somewhere around 1/2, and you're a long shot. I guess from time to time, people are going to play this. They're going to spin the roulette wheel. Like if you make a business out of this, that's a fundamental problem you need to correct. And you need to go all the way up to the probative conversation and address the power imbalance in your client relationships. You are not seen as meaningfully different enough. So all of these things, your ability to have these value conversations with the right people, it grows out of the qualifying conversation, and that itself, are you qualifying the right people? That grows out of the probative conversation. We'll get to the closing conversation next week. In training of the 4 conversations, we spend the least time on the closing conversation. Because if you handle the preceding conversations well, closing is easy and it takes the pressure off you. You're not overinvested in the sale. You're in the power position in the relationship. You show up and you're not trying to convince anybody of anything. Hey, there are different ways, 3 different ways we can do this. Let me walk you through them. Let's have a conversation about which of these seems to make the most sense for you. Like, who wouldn't want to sell that way?
I would add to this. This is a really good, if you're looking for a tell or some indicator that you've fallen off the principles and the objective for the conversation. Look at where you may be trying to convince. Look at your language. Look at what's on the proposal. If you're adding value judgments, good, better, best, premium, whatever, you're trying to talk them into something. You need to be in a position of having clarified what they want. You've got some options for how to deliver what they want. Those options have different combinations of features and prices, and you're simply going to present those options and facilitate a choice, which is great. And it feels so good. It really does, to be able to be there saying, okay, we've thought creatively and expansively about what you want. And I or my team, we've come up with some ways to solve that problem. I'd like to just walk you through them. Which one, and then at the end, pause. Which
And we'll
one of
cover that
these
next week.
looks most interesting? So, yeah,
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Stephen asks, have you ever had a negative reaction to the 3-option approach? I had my first recently.
Yeah, I
Stephen
saw
says.
that question.
Yeah.
I've never had a negative option. I have heard of people having negative options, just like negative reactions, just like I've heard of people having negative reactions to the 3-year question. And I can't prove this, but most of the time, I'm pretty confident it's in the communication and not the artifact.
Yeah.
The problem. The problem is in the communication. The problem is, so you might be over elaborating on it. You might be unnecessarily dragging things out. But a problem with the 3-option proposal, maybe like, okay, has the flip happened? Are you going to have a problem with a three-option proposal with somebody who has authority, who recognizes and values your expertise? Not likely. You're going to have a reaction to three-option proposal when you've got somebody who says, like, I told you what I want. You came back with all this other stuff. Surprise. I didn't ask for any of this stuff.
Yeah.
If you if you if you should have told me that if you couldn't do what I want at the price, then there's like just we should have ended the conversation last week or last month. Now you've wasted my time. Okay, what's going on here? What's going on here is you proceeded like so there is this danger. So we all reside somewhere on this autonomy spectrum. Creative people tend to be highly autonomous and they don't want to follow a system or a routine, right? That's why I think frameworks are on one and the other end, you've got systematic process oriented people. Engineers, accountants tend to be this way. I'm generalizing when I say engineers and accountants are like this, creative people are like this, but creativity is like that is correlated to high autonomy. You don't want to be hemmed in by something. The danger with people at the high autonomy creative end of the spectrum is they're loose, too loose with the system. And I have clients like this that we've worked with for years, and it's like, God damn, just quit asking me the same question year after year. Follow the framework. And then at the other end of the spectrum, there are the people with the glasses on, heads down, following the framework to a T, oblivious to the reaction from the client, the seething or the looking at the watch, the nonverbal cues perhaps that it's like, no, you're dragging this out. I don't value this, etc. So what do? I don't know. We're all saddled with the emotional intelligence we're saddled with, but just ask yourself if you're getting this frustration from clients, you're probably over elaborating on the process, or your heads down and too focused on the framework and not heads up paying attention to the client. So you do want to find that sweet spot in the middle. And it's
Yeah.
easy for me to say, but it can be hard to do.
Eric just posted a question that I wanted to address anyway. This is really great. The question is, sounds like the more transparent we are with the framework we follow and how it's beneficial to both sides, manages client expectations. Do you suggest we're always transparent about the four conversations, et cetera? So what I was going to add, my answer to this, Blair, and I'll kick it over to you, is as a linguist, we distinguish meta language, meaning talk about talk, right, from normal language. And I find it very helpful to add that meta layer to these conversations from the very beginning. Say, so I have a particular way that I like to engage with a potential client. And I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and I won't go through it all here in the interest of time. Shannon Lee has a great video on the YouTube channel that walks through this. You just tell them, we're going to do this, and then I'm going to ask you about that, and I'm going to do this. I've even started putting in my calendar engagements for the value conversation, the agenda, and I'll tell them, here's what we're going to cover when we talk on this call. We're going to explore more about the outcomes you're looking for, how we'll measure those outcomes, et cetera. So I'm not sure that's the right answer, but in any case, I'm always looking for ways to make it what we're doing clear. I'm going to tell them, listen, my goal here is not to fix a price, but to give to determine a range, and then we're going to come back to you with three options. So you tell them what you're doing as you're doing it.
Yeah, that's I love what you have to say on meta language there, Adrian. And it also speaks to this idea that the prospect's mind is malleable. You're basically saying, here's how this needs to work on my end. I'm going to ask you a series of questions. Who's going to push back on that? I think the questioner was it, I forget who it was, but there is so yeah, make the framework visible. We say that in training all the time. Make the framework visible. Pull out your pen when you're calculating value in the value conversation. Pull up the calculator and do the math, etc. So make it visible. But again, you could overplay this. Thinking of the previous question, You could, or my answer to the previous question, where you could be guilty of just over elaborating on the model, on the framework. So
Yeah.
try it,
There's
experiment.
several people asking about that video. I will go get the link to that. Blair, we have so many questions here, but I'd love you to answer the final question, which was the most recent from Clifton, because I think it touches on some things and might allow Avery to post a blog link as well. Clifton asks, regarding the one-page proposal, does that live separate from a capabilities or about us deck? Is it all one longer document, but the proposal itself is only one page? Every client asks for case studies, team bios, etc. How do you handle that additional information that you send to the client?
Avery will paste the link to a recent post I wrote. David and I have recorded a podcast on it. It hasn't dropped yet. And it's called There Is No Credentials Meeting. Doesn't mean there aren't credentials. Well, let me reframe that. So the answer to the question is yes. It's the one-page proposal is separate from all this other stuff. All this other stuff that you identify, Clifton, a lot of it pretty valid, belongs in different places. Some of it, bios, etc., your website. I think so. The credentials document that you want to share, where you want to go into presentation mode and share it with the client, that is in a qualifying conversation. That is you trying to qualify for the client. And what I say in this post and in the podcast, we talk about it in training, is the framework for the qualifying conversation is for you to qualify the client. And then the second half of the qualifying conversation is when you say, now, what do you need to know about us? Now, they might send you things in advance. Here's what we need to know about you. I like to change this, try to break down those dynamics of they email you, here's what we want from you, and you email it back. We're always trying to have conversations. But let's keep it in the context of a qualifying conversation. So you qualify, you decide there's a good fit, and then you say, so I'll be the consultant and Adrian's the client. Adrian, surely there's some things that you need to know about us. Now, if the flip has happened in a probative conversation, then I've answered a lot of these things. But, the larger the organization, the more it's procurement driven, the larger the budgets, et cetera, the more you get into these formal selection processes. They might ask about the team. So there's certain questions that can be answered on your website. And what you want to do, the client is saying in this qualifying conversation, when you said, what do you need to know from us? A lot of clients will want you to go into presentation mode. They will want to make sure that you demonstrate through your behavior that they are the prize to be won. They have the power in the relationships. And you want to resist the temptation to get on your soapbox, go into full presentation mode, and share all of these things. You also want to resist the temptation to put it all into one document. Some of you won't be able to for reasons of who your clients are. The two things that you should be prepared to share, we talked about this last week in a qualifying conversation in the second half, is your model, how you work, and your case studies. So you absolutely should have that. All the other stuff, how long have you been in business, et cetera, just answer them. Answer the questions as they're asked. Now, again, the way you're asking the question, Clifton, tells me that you're dealing with clients who don't recognize and value your expertise, or it's all just procurement or RFP driven. So I would say you want to invest some resources to try to get ahead of that and try to break down those dynamics. Experiment. Try to break down those dynamics. Take an opportunity where you don't really care if you win it for whatever reason and try to handle it differently. Say, well, I'm not going to send you all that in a document, but I'm happy to hop on a call and answer your questions. And there are some things that I can share with you in that call. Okay.
Yeah. Again, you're the expert. Your duty is to lead. If you can't lead in the sale, you will not be able to lead in the engagement. Plan your behaviors accordingly.
Yeah.
Blair, we stayed on a little longer than we said for the after party. I just want to thank everyone who had to leave already, everyone who stuck around, everyone who's watching the recording and wasn't able to join us live. The final of our 4 book club events will be next Tuesday. We'll be talking about the closing conversation, and we'll try to sweep up some of the questions that maybe haven't been answered yet. As Blair said, a lot of the answering is taking place in blogs. So if you're not on the Win Without Pitching email list, I invite you to do that. They're also on LinkedIn. There was a whole conversation the other day that actually somebody called out and said, "Hey, I loved the fact that there was this discussion about transformational value happening on LinkedIn." So please find us wherever we are and engage with us there. Blair, any final words?
Nope, that's it. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. Do know that I read all of them afterwards, and then I'll be answering some of them in various places. So keep posting them, and I hope to see you next week.
Take care.